Hey, what's good, my fellow masters? So with the second part of Lostbelt 7, Nahui Mictlān, set to officially release on January 15th, 0000 hours PST, that means the arrival of the limited 5-star assassin Tezcatlipoca is close at hand. So here's a look at what he can bring to the table, since when I previously talked about him, they were mainly really quick summaries of a sort. If you're not familiar with Tezcatlipoca, and perhaps wondering if he could make a good addition to your Chaldea, then hopefully this will give you a better idea of whether or not to roll for him. For me, he's the type of arts AoE assassin I've been waiting for, and I'll expand on that more in a bit. This stylish looking assassin, who doesn't seem to mind showing off his abs, has a level 90 base attack stat of 10,982, which is the second lowest among SSR Assassin servants, just ahead of Osaka Behemoth. Factoring in the base damage modifier of assassins, in practical terms, that's an attack of 9,883. On the other hand, his base HP stat is the highest of the current SSR assassins at 14,535, giving Tez the ability to take several hits better than most. His base star absorb is 99, one down from the assassin standard, but his star generation is 25.5%, which is 0.5 more than the standard for assassins. As for MP generation, Tezcatlipoca's base rate is 0.41% per attack and 4% on defense. His base death rate is considerably lower than the 55% standard for assassins at just 33%. Tezcatlipoca's attribute is Sky, or localized as Heaven, and his alignment is Chaotic Good. He has a number of traits. He owns a costume. He's a divine spirit and naturally possesses divinity. He's humanoid, immune to Pigify, a living human, a non-Hominidae servant, a pseudo-servant, 7 knight servants, and weak to Gilgamesh's Enema Elish NP. This Aztec deity has a card deck consisting of 1 quick card, 2 arts, and 2 buster, a rather balanced layout in general. The cards themselves have ample hit counts, with 4 hits for the lone quick card, 3 hits for each arts card, and 4 hits for his buster cards, plus a pretty substantial 6 hits on his extra attack. But enough about his stats, traits, and whatnot. The interesting bits are with the active skills in his kit. Well, that and his NP, of course. Tezcatlipoca's first skill is a rather straightforward 3-turn buff to the party's attack, ranging from 10% to 20% based on skill level. However, there is a second effect for any allies that have a Guts status, which effectively doubles that attack buff for 3 turns. And it should be noted, his first skill is on a relatively short 5-turn cooldown at max level. An important factor that can come into play during drawn-out boss fights or if any cooldown reduction effects are utilized. His second skill covers 2 important effects that I generally like to see in a servant kit: NP charge and a hard defense buff. In Tezcatlipoca's case, there are 2 NP batteries tied to the skill. One is a 50% charge for himself at max level, and you all know how much I favor those. The other benefits just his allies, providing up to a 30% NP charge, which not many servants that have a party-wide NP battery can do. On the defensive side of things, this skill will also grant the party a 3-turn invincibility that's limited to taking 2 hits. It's not all beneficial effects, however, as there is a demerit of a party-wide 1-time 3-turn invincibility buff block, which could be inconvenient if you need to apply another invincibility within that period. And as one would expect, such a skill with significant NP charge effects has a rather lengthy 7-turn cooldown at max. Lastly, we have Tezcatlipoca's third skill with buffs that are purely dedicated just to him. It gives him a 1-time 3-turn Guts that revives with up to 3k HP. So some order usage priority for this skill can be relevant if you want to get the most out of the attack buffs from his first skill. Then to stack with that, he gets a 3-turn arts performance boost that ranges from 20% to a decent 30% at max level. Plus, there are 2 power mod buffs tied to the skill as well, one against divine enemies and the other against enemies that have this super large trait. Both buffs lasting for 3 turns each, and both a significant 50% damage increase at max level. And then to cap things off, Tez is granted a Sunlight Battlefield Nullification buff for 3 turns. At max level, this third skill has a moderate length 6-turn cooldown. For passives, Tez possesses 5 of them: a 20% debuff resistance, a 10% increase to his arts cards, which of course will stack nicely with his third skill's 30% arts buff, a modest flat damage increase of 150 due to his divinity, a 10% buff to his buster cards, and lastly, he gets a unique passive that benefits Mystic Code skills by increasing their overall values by 10%, when Tezcatlipoca is on the field. Looking at his Appends skills, the first and second ones are the commonly shared ones among all servants. The relatively more unique third Append for Tezcatlipoca gives an increase to his attack versus other assassins, ranging from 20 to 30%. Not bad as far as third Append skills go, but one I think falls behind the mana loading Append in terms of priority for unlocking. And then of course, there are the fourth and fifth Append skills we can look forward to being added to the game in the future, most likely during the 9th anniversary in 2026, if Lysengo keeps to the same update schedule as JP. The other typical core aspect to a servant kit is, of course, the Noble Phantasm. As touched on earlier, Tezcatlipoca has an arts AoE type that hits each enemy 4 times, and it has 2 effects. The first is a 1-turn ignore invincibility that is applied before the NP fires off, and the other is a party-wide 10% NP charge, which will obviously aid Tez in his overall NP gauge refund. The overcharge effect is an NP damage boost that scales from 20% to 40% based on the OC stage, and fortunately it's the type that activates first. I'm a really big fan of these, especially for servants capable of NP looping in some way or another, since it means from wave 1 to wave 3 the NP damage buff will stack with each use. And of course, the OC effect being an increase to Tezcatlipoca's NP damage will make Oberon's third skills buffs that much more effective should the situation call for it. Now, as far as general AoE NP damage output goes, when Tezcatlipoca is added, he falls just behind SSR Shuten Doji and Cleopatra, who are the current top 1 and 2 respectively among their fellow AoE assassins. But that just reflects a one-wave scenario. With Tez's stacking overcharge NP damage buff, his wave 2 and wave 3 damage will overtake Shuten's output. It's also worth noting with each NP level Tez gains, the less of a difference there is between Shuten's general NP damage calculation and his own in a one-wave scenario. And this is not factoring in Tez's skill-based power mod buffs that are effective when facing divine or super large enemies. Obviously, his NP damage significantly jumps up when this advantage can be leveraged. Now, at the beginning I said I've been waiting for an AoE arts assassin like Tez, and if you've been watching me for a while, then you probably guessed it was due to his 50% NP battery. What can I say? I'm a simple master. I see a large NP battery and I get smitten. And among the 4 other AoE arts assassins currently in the game, only 2 have actively triggered NP charges. Shuten with 30% and the Summer Valkyries with a targetable 20%. And while 20% is nice to have, especially one that can be used to support others, and 30% is good, 50% tends to be the sweet spot for overall flexibility for CE choice, which typically leads to the ability to effectively tackle different types of quests, whether boss fights or farming nodes like the 90+ ones and beyond. Since you would tend to use an assassin to deal with a rider node, and rider enemies provide the highest NP refund, Tezcatlipoca supported with double Castoria can loop his NP quite well in this scenario, even if using a CE with no starting charge like a Black Grail. Against the low NP refund giving Berserker enemies, depending on the NP level Tez is at, a third support with an NP charge may be needed. But Tezcatlipoca is definitely more than just his large battery with good NP looping potential. He can work quite well in a multi-core setup with his party-wide attack and 30% charge for his allies, which effectively would end up being 40% by using his NP at least once in the battle. If you can be selective and use the servants that have a guts effect alongside him, then Tez can provide an even stronger attack buff for those allies. 40% attack up is a pretty significant advantage he can bring. And with his beefy damage modifiers against divine and super large enemies, he can still be relatively semi-effective in a neutral class advantage situation against enemies with those traits. He's blessed with 2 ways to mitigate an incoming enemy NP, with his 2-hit invincibility that extends to the party as well, and a separate guts effect for, just in case there's a backup. Then there's that ignore invincibility built right into his NP, which can be so useful for those challenge quests and the like that have an enemy with an unremovable invincibility gimmick. And that unique passive of his that increases the value of master skills, well, that's just icing on the cake for how much value he can bring overall. So bottom line from me, if you don't have an SSR AoE assassin, I think Tezcatlipoca is a great choice. Though, if you already have Coin Sky of Light and she's your only SSR AoE assassin, then it becomes a bit trickier to decide if adding Tez is warranted or not. They both have distinct strengths, and generally speaking, their skill sets do not overlap heavily. That is to say, having both of them in your roster would not be a waste, and having both would be beneficial in my opinion. However, if you have a higher priority target to roll for in the future, then I think continuing to rely on Koyan of Light to cover the SSR AoE assassin duties is fine in order to save SQ. Of course, if you have the Summer Valkyrie's Welfare Assassin unit, they can more than adequately cover the AoE arts aspect of assassins. However, they do cover a different niche, having a damage modifier for the Earth attribute enemies, so it's not as though they would be completely useless if Tez was present in the roster. And it's noteworthy to mention that even at NP5, the Summer Valkyrie's general NP damage output is less than Tezcatlipoca at NP1. For those that do want to roll for him but just need to wait for a future opportunity, Tez will have a banner later in the year around late July or August, and if that's still bad timing, very likely, Tez will next be available in December 2026. Personally, I will be opting to wait for a future banner to obtain Tezcatlipoca. I do want him as I think he's very good, but there are just too many other higher priority servants coming this year. Well, maybe our July anniversary's Destiny Order or its GSSR will save me the trouble. At any rate, I wish everyone that plans to roll for Tez the best of luck. Let me know in the comments if you are rolling or if a certain LB7 foreigner will be your next target. I hope this was helpful in some way for anyone that may have been wondering about Tezcatlipoca. Please leave a like if that was the case, or if you simply enjoyed the video in general. As always, thank you so much for watching, and until the next one, cheers all.